So first of all, welcome to Whiskey Roadshow weekend now. Roadshow was only supposed to be a 2-hour, one-day event. I had an event last night. We've been talking on the radio, on the podcast all this morning. We have a book signing by Robin Robinson. Robin will be signing books throughout the day. And you'll be here tonight signing books too during, yeah.
I've got a chain. Yeah, there's actually it's an invisible fence around here.
Yes,
I can't go.
if you, and I'm stopping. That's So Roadshow's grown just a little bit today, and this was an important piece that Julio's had decided last year at Go Whiskey Weekend as something that we really wanted to happen. We had been talking to Matt Hoffman, Winston was there. We were talking about doing a American Single Malt Symposium and getting all some of the single malt suppliers of America together and talk about it. Well, take the bull by the horns. This is what happens when an idea comes to life and starts to percolate. So this is sort of the one that we're actually going that's really going to involve you. It's going to involve the suppliers on this side. This is an experiment. Now, whether this works and turns into the Jerry Springer show, we'll find out. Steve, where's Steve? There he is. To knock people out, especially Lou. So I'm going to let these guys take over. I hope you guys have a really great time today. I hope you guys are coming back tonight, obviously for the Whiskey Roadshow, and try some other whiskeys that we're going to have. Gio says we're up to 40 tables. So we'll be opening up the, what we like to call the back alley. So we have another 1,500 square feet back there that we'll be opening up. It'll all be down here, and it'll always be, as always, a lot of fun. So without further ado, Steve, I'm going to let you take over, introduce everybody, and then let the mayhem begin.
Yeah, thanks Ryan, appreciate it. My name's Steve Hawley, I'm with Westland Distillery. I also head up the American Single Malt Commission, which is what everybody's here to talk about and taste. A couple orders of business. All the whiskeys in front of you, we are not doing a moderated tasting, so feel free to jump around as you please. If you have any questions about the whiskeys themselves, these guys are happy to answer those throughout the afternoon. Also for Mark here, who's going to be doing a podcast as well. If you have a question, we're going to record the questions. So everybody outside the room and across the world can follow along as well. So if you have a question, please raise your hands gently. And please wait until Josh gets around and he's going to bring a microphone out to you. So we'll all be adults here today. For a while at least.
Why is Lou here?
Nice. I like where this is going. This is great. So the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, we started in 2016 at a meeting in Chicago. There were 9 of us who braved a blizzard to come out and sit down and outline what's called a standard of identity, which is in the brochure that you have in front of you. Defining what single malt in America is. We booked, I think, Jared, 4 hours for that maybe, and we took about 30 minutes. We thought it was going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight about what should be included, what should not be included. We're going to talk a lot about that today, but it took about 30 minutes. We all agreed real quickly, and we had some drinks and had a good time. So we're going to take you through, again, the definition, why we landed on what we landed on. We're going to take you through a bit of an update on the regulatory status, which is a big deal for the Commission, and then talk to you a little bit about some of the common questions that we have. Super excited to have Lou here joining us. We do these events all over the country. We've been really excited and anticipating this one at Julio's because obviously this is a great crowd. It's a great place to do it, and we're super excited to be here. I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves. How about guys, just a quick 2 words on the whiskeys so we can get that out of the way and they can enjoy them as we're going through everything else. And then we'll get started. So, Chris.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris Riesbeck. I'm the Global Commercial Director at the Westland Distillery out in Seattle, Washington. I love the fact that we've clearly gotten enough point of sale out into the marketplace to see a bunch of Westland hats already in the audience. Well done wearing your flair out to the event. Appreciate that.
It's all about the blend.
Yeah, we're really excited today. Obviously, for us, the commission is something we're super passionate about and early members and part of the co-founders for. But what you're going to be tasting from us today is our Garyana Edition 4. For those of you that had an opportunity to taste Garyana, this is our newest release. Garyana is a project built around a local species of oak known as Quercus garyana, or Gary oak, Oregon oak, that grows basically now in a really small stretch of land in the Pacific Northwest. It's our ability to tell a really compelling story about a whiskey that really has everything available to it in our region, which is super exciting. And this year's edition is the first time that we're incorporating a sherry cask in the batting as well. So you can imagine Gary oak, if you're not familiar with it, it's a really big, dark, heavy flavor. Take everything that exists in classic Quercus alba white oak and make it heavier and richer. So it's, brown sugar, molasses, ginger, clove, a little bit of smoke to it. It's a really interesting style of cask. And then incorporating a sherry cask here, a PX hogshead, so a lot of sweetness in there. It's a really interesting sort of taste profile. Hopefully you'll all enjoy it, but I was told by Ryan to make clear there are 12 bottles, and that is it. So I'm just setting the expectation right now up front.
Yeah, right.
It pays to know people to get that much.
You got more than anyone else, Ryan.
I had to take you too, though. That was the problem.
You walked into that one.
Wow.
Fair enough. Jeff, go on, have at it.
Jared Hinstead, head distiller at Balcones Distilling in Waco, Texas. What we brought is not released yet. It's actually still in the barrel. So this is just a barrel sample that we grabbed. We are playing around with Texas grown and malted barley, but it's not a historic barley region for lots of reasons. So that's kind of a new even option just from the last few years. So we've mostly historically played with Golden Promise. Anybody who's into currently older Scotch or was around when Golden Promise was kind of the ubiquitous Scotch barley of choice for single malt production in Scotland, will be familiar with it. Simpson family owns it, so it's a proprietary variety that they own and grow. And we get directly from them. They don't offer a peated version, but when we moved to our new facility about 3 or 4 years ago, the volume they would need to do a custom peating for us, we could actually receive. So we do about 3 fermentations or so a year to run through that. So it's not a whole lot, but this is a single barrel that was laid down in ex-bourbon to start with. That's Golden Promise, custom peated to 65 ppm, and it's been sitting in Saltern now for about 8 months, I think. So, cask strength too, so.
All right. I'm Gareth Moore from Virginia Distillery Company down in Nelson County, Virginia. Obviously, it would be in Virginia. It would be strange if it wasn't. We are brand new in terms of having an American Single Malt on the market. We've, for the past several years, had a blended malt on the shelf that somehow managed to upset the Scotch Whisky Association by its name, the Virginia Highland Whiskey Series. But we're very happy to have a true American Single Malt that was from end to end made on site in Virginia. We're calling it our prelude to our flagship Courage and Conviction American Single Malt. And what it is our kind of first casks that we're ready to get out into market. It was a limited run, one time only, about 700 cases. It's somewhere between 3.5 years. There are 3 different types of casks that the whiskey was aged in, primarily ex-bourbon casks, first fills. We also have Oloroso sherry in there, and then the last, we call it the cuvee cask, but it's a shaved toast and recoopered European oak cask. So those are the 3 that we have in all of our inventory. We're a lot higher on the bourbon because that's what we were doing earliest, and that's what we got up to the 3.5 years. But come April, we'll have a very similar product, but it'll be the flagship that has a higher ratio of the sherry in it, it has a higher ratio of the cuvee, and will also be all over 4 years. So that's our product.
My name is Ralph Lorenzo. I'm one of the co-founders of Tuttletown Spirits, the makers of Hudson Whiskey. Our single malt was not the first thing that we made. The first thing we made was a bourbon, our baby bourbon. And when we started, we didn't really know how to grade. Well, we didn't really know anything about making whiskey. We had to teach ourselves everything, including how to build a distillery. And And so when it came to making our first bourbon and our rye, we didn't know how to blend the grains together properly to get the flavors we wanted. So we just figured, let's make a whiskey out of each grain, and then we'll decide how to blend them together. And as it turned out, the first three we made out of a single grain, was our baby bourbon, which is 90% corn, our Manhattan rye, which is 90% rye, and our single malt, which is 100% malted barley. It is the only thing that we cannot sell in our whiskey shop at the distillery, because it's not technically a New York whiskey. There was nobody, when we started, there was nobody malting barley anywhere in New York State, and so we had to get all our malted barley from Canada. And so the only things we can sell in our tasting room are things 75% New York grown raw materials, which is what we use in everything else except this. And the state is now working with Cornell Cooperative Extension with test growings all over the state to figure out what are the best varieties of barley to reintroduce in New York. After Prohibition, the barley growing farmers stopped growing barley, partially because you couldn't get crop insurance for barley. So, and it's not an easy thing to grow in the Northeast. So we're having to start it out all over again to redevelop that whole part of the industry. But it is coming together. So this is the first legal single malt whiskey made in New York since Prohibition, but it's also our first stab at making a single malt. And we liked it so much we just kept it the way it is. So we're making it exactly the same way now as we did then, except we're making a lot more of it.
I'm Lou Bryson, I don't make whiskey. I write about it, I have a book out, I have another book coming in February, I have promotional postcards for that book, and I just got the proof of it yesterday, which was, you know, it's always a cool day.
No, the name.
Why? Oh, Whiskey Masterclass. Not my suggestion. I thought that was a little, you know, presumptive. But the editor seemed to think it would sell, which I'm all for selling books, so that works. I was here because Steve asked me to come along, and I think we'll have some fun. It's always good to talk about whiskey with people who know about whiskey. Just the fact that you guys came out for this probably is a bit of self-selection, so I'm pretty sure this is a good crowd. I don't need to say anything about these guys, they just did. I think we're gonna have a good time, have a good discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's do that.
Yeah, so what do we want to talk about first? A little background on the commission. Again, we started in 2016 as a group of people that recognized that in order for us all to be successful individually, we needed to create a category that didn't exist. The category is important in order to position ourselves in the right way and to tell all of you guys exactly what we make. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Right now there's over 140, I think this is actually just 150 producers now of American single malt whiskey in this country. Not a lot of people think about single malt when they think of American whiskey, and not a lot of people would imagine that there's this many people, this many distillers making single malt in this country. But indeed there are, and again, at various levels, of course, from a volume standpoint, but there's a lot of people that are out there looking to make single malt whiskey in America, and there's a voice to be had in the global single malt conversation that Americans can join. Again, there's been a lot of coverage lately. You know, we talk about this and build this thing as the next big thing in whiskey. We believe it is. There's a lot of momentum behind what we're doing. There's a lot of interest in people writing and talking about what we're doing, and that's why we're here. The big question that everybody has is, what is American single malt whiskey? And I want to get into the details of this and have these guys kind of reminisce from 2016 and talk a little bit about why we decided to word things the way we did. And wording is important, extremely important. So I want to get into the details of each of these things. And like Lou says, there's a little bit of self-selection going on here. We're assuming everybody here wants to get a little nerdy with things, so we're going to get a little nerdy with things.
You asked for it.
You asked for it. You got the ticket. So just real quickly, made from 100% malted barley, distilled entirely at one distillery, mashed, distilled, and matured in the United States. Matured in oak casks of a capacity not exceeding 700 liters. Distilled in no more than 160 proof. bottled at 80 proof or more. So I want to go through each one of these things and have these guys address them one by one. And unlike last time where I singled you guys out and then I had to remember who gets the next question, I'm just going to let you guys have at it at this point. That way it's fair. So this one, I hope we can get through pretty quickly. Made from 100% malted barley. Take it away.
I mean, I think this is probably the easiest one.
Chris takes the easy part.
Yeah, I'll jump on the easy one. I'll leave the actual. I'll leave the production. I'll do the ones that have to do with production. But you know, when I think about single malt whiskey, I think it's quite obvious. I think if you were to ask this question to consumers literally around the world, what does that insinuate? It insinuates a single distillery, 100% malted barley. In my mind, the definition for what we wanted the commission to carry through for American Single Malt Whiskey wanted to honor that concept and frankly make it standardized here closer to home. We want you as a consumer, when you buy a bottle of American Single Malt, to know it's 100% malted barley in the bottle. It's as simple as that. You are owed that level of transparency when you're willing to part with your money to buy any of our whiskeys.
Okay, another softball. Distilled entirely at one distillery.
I'll take it.
There's only one softball left after this, so.
All right, well, distilled entirely at one distillery. We started with, how about 5 distilleries? How about 4? Then there was 3. So how about 2 distilleries? And then by the end of the day, it was like, no, just one distillery, single. It's really, really nice. It totally made sense. But you know, it goes back to
This is whiskey logic.
What consumers are expecting, right? And when they're thinking about what our friends over in Scotland are doing and other regions, when you're saying single, you're really saying that we're not talking about a blend of a lot of different styles. This is one distillery, and we have plenty in the 140 of us now that are making our own styles. So it's that single, just one, not 2, 3, 4, or 5.
This next one, we never considered 6.
Let's just be serious, Brian, for a minute. My God.
With the government, you can't do it.
Next one again is softball. The one thing that you'll hear us talk about a lot today is Japanese whiskey, the rise of Japanese whiskey, what's happening in Japanese whiskey right now. This might seem pretty obvious, right? Mashed, distilled, and matured in the United States of America. Maybe not so obvious given what's going on around the world. So who wants to take this one? Last softball.
They were still fighting about some of this with Scotch fairly recent.
Yeah.
Scotch, I mean, you could call it Scotch if it was still, if it wasn't bottled in Scotland, if the aging wasn't completed in Scotland, it had to be the first 3 years, I think, had to be in Scotland. And they just got this settled, what, 10 years ago?
Yeah,
2009.
And it was taxes that fixed it.
It's always taxes. All of this shit is about taxes. Every damn, sorry.
Get off, Lou, get off my lawn.
No, seriously, a lot of laws and regulations about any kind of booze makes a lot more sense if you think about taxes. It's like I told my kids, if there's ever anything when you're reading history that doesn't make sense to you, it's either sex, drugs, or money. That's what's really going on. It's like, why did they do that? Why did they go to war with that? It's like, because he wanted to screw the prince. Oh. Same thing with jazz music. It all makes sense if you realize that what they're really talking about is sex or drugs. So it's all about taxes.
I had very different discussions with my parents as a child. Very different upbringing.
The weird part is the kids, when Lou was discussing them, were only 5.
And they weren't his kids.
They were on his lawn.
And they got right the hell off. Go figure.
I wonder if everybody else here has faced the same problem I've had is when you say you're making a single malt. Oh, Scotch.
Yes.
And one of the first things we have to do is explain the difference between the two.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And when I describe the difference, the main difference, well, main 2 differences, one of them is the Scotch Whisky Association, which owns all of the handcuffs in the UK that go on to all the whiskey makers over there by their strict rules. And the other one is the barrel. The Europeans are using EU rules, which are a knockoff of the Scotch Whisky Association rules, and they allow them to use used bourbon barrels, which is primarily what they use. But here, we have to use a new barrel, every time under the current law to age, but there's no minimum age, so you could literally put it in and then take it out the next day and put it in a used barrel. But those are the two major differences, and the barrel is everything to, the wood is everything to American whiskey makers. It's much more of a conditioning agent in Scotch and Irish whiskey making rather than a flavoring agent. And so one of the things that we're looking at is trying to, with these suggestions for the standards of identity, is to open up American distillers to using used casks and still being able to call it whiskey, because it's problematic. It's very expensive to buy a new barrel for every single batch you make. And not only that, but then you only get one use out of it, unless you're using it to steer flavor later on down the road. That's a major consideration.
What's really interesting is we've got 2 more clauses here. What's really interesting is going to be talking about what's not in here versus what is in here. But let's finish the last 2 real first.
Before you move on.
Yeah.
The United States of America. Puerto Rico count?
Ooh.
That's a good question.
How about the Philippines? How about U.S. Virgin
Okay,
Islands?
not the Philippines. The Philippines are definitely out. Pretty sure of that.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Alright.
100%.
Excuse me? I'm just wondering, what
Right.
about Puerto Rico?
Guys, that's a good question. What about Puerto Rico?
It's a territory of the United States. I'd say yes.
They're American citizens.
Yeah.
But it's not a state.
No.
It doesn't say anything about us.
What's my middle name?
Well, then Hawaii's out too.
Yeah, because they're not united, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
it's actually right next to Russia.
So I think the important part to take away from this, and Ryan raises a really good point, quite frankly, is that there are aspects of this, by bringing this definition formally to the TTB, we're going to utilize their definition of what do they assume the United States of America to be. Does it incorporate territories? Does it incorporate parts of the United States that are technically under our governmental system, but not actually voting bodies within it? So that'll be.
That's probably a pretty easy question. Not that I know the answer, but somebody does. Does the TTB license distilleries in Puerto Rico or not? And do they pay taxes if they do?
In the US
That answers that question.
Pretty much.
I mean, yes. So,
U.S. Virgin Islands, they do too.
so yeah, obviously that would govern them too. Any TTB.
Yeah, for every. I feel like I'm leaning into this.
But I think only Diageo would be able to do that. Is that right?
Well, right now, they
you know, it was hard enough to convince people that you could make bourbon in anywhere but Kentucky. It'll be really hard to convince people that you can make bourbon in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Hey, who wants to go to the U.S. Virgin Islands?
I'll do that.
Let's go.
Research Commission right now.
But for everybody here, in case you don't know, the TTB is the governmental body that regulates what we can and cannot call spirits in this country. It is part of the Treasury Department, and it's a huge component of what the Commission was established to do, which is to petition the TTB for a standard definition. So that is, to answer your question, Ryan, just what Ryan said. We are not here to tell the TTB how to do their jobs. If they consider Puerto Rico, if they consider Puerto Rico part of the United States, then your answer is there. If they don't, your answer is there. So we'll talk again a little bit about the regulatory process in a minute, and talk about some of the questions that surround how the TTB works and allows for these things. So who wants to take matured in oak casks of capacity not exceeding 700 liters? So 2 common questions here is why oak and why 700? Jared, you want to take that?
Yeah, so part of the trick of having to juggle this was knowing it has the potential for international commerce ramifications. And so trying to, for pragmatic reasons, we're not going to the TTB and asking them like, hey, you have this overarching definition of what whiskey can be that's very vague, but has a few things, like the other things we're going to get to in a minute. Like, you're not going to go to them and ask them to change the 160 proof and the 40% at bottom. Like, that's just not going to happen. And the 700 liter had a little bit to do with EU regulations. They have a cap on that size, and we want to make sure that as little friction as possible as this stuff goes abroad. And then oak casks, once again, that's part of the definition, so oak containers.
Why is that 700 implemented here and abroad? Why that number?
Is that the size of a Madeira drum or something?
Something has to be stored in that size. It's a long or something.
No, it's
We've got a couple of questions, Josh, if you want to get over there.
Yeah, it's some damn wine thing.
yeah, it's the answer is
Taxes, wine.
Is there a benefit to doing more than 700 liters?
Sorry, again?
Is there some kind of benefit to doing more than 700 liters?
I mean, technically speaking, you could,
To the whiskey. I
Yeah.
don't care about anyone else.
you could technically speaking, and I'm certainly not advocating for this, but you could technically, it would just be a quick way if you wanted to flush distillate through a barrel by having a larger capacity, you wouldn't need to have as many of them. So you could literally dunk right from your spirits receiver after it gets diluted directly into that. I would not advocate doing that, but you could technically, and I could see it as being one of those things where it's cost saving at the expense of quality.
Is that what Pabst is doing?
That really is the intent.
I'm running that over a board.
That really is the intent both abroad and with our definition as well, is to maintain the integrity of maturation in general and not kind of give a loophole to people that could just touch whiskey, touch spirit with an enormous vessel that isn't really doing anything to mature the whiskey.
Would you guys also know if that is that size of pretty much a ton? You know, like a ton container?
Brian, I don't do math. Not in my head.
Google knows. I think tons are.
tons are bigger.
Bigger, right?
Tons are much bigger. For us in Texas, just because the climate changes, we've actually gone up and played around with bigger barrels on purpose because you do get a much lighter extraction. And obviously, you know, by like year 4 or 5, we've got a barrel that's about a third full and it's pitch black. So lower entry proof and bigger sizes has been one way for us to actually age or start looking into aging at more normal age ranges instead of 2 and 3 year old product to maybe actually get to an 8 or 10. But once again, we start stripping stuff around and they're like, hey, this doesn't count as whiskey on our shelf because we let everybody just do these massive barrels and it's not really going to help. So, yeah.
I will say this, these last 3 pieces, the matured no cask, capacity not exceeding 700, the distilled to no more, and then the bottled no less, you can really start to see that we want this thing to take shape. We want to put in certain safeguards against people doing things that are frankly just to push product out to the marketplace without a genuine focus on quality. And the more that but there's also a defining line there. You don't want to be so enforcing things that you lose sight of creativity. There's a big part of the oak component is that it's not specifying new or used cooperage. It's not specifying that it needs to be a certain style of oak. It just needs to be oak because you want to leave it to the producers, the creators of these things to showcase their creativity, to showcase what they believe in. The way we make whiskey in Washington State from a technical perspective might be quite similar to Texas and Virginia and New York State. But it doesn't mean that we want to make the same whiskey as them. Ralph made the point, and it cannot be spoken about enough. We are the antithesis to Scotch whiskey in America. That has zero interest for any of us up here. We want to make American Single Malt because, frankly, this country has an enormously broad agricultural system to play with, and we want to celebrate the regionality of that from each of these producers. The more that you put in here that ties that down to a specific style, and in my mind, that really speaks to why we didn't want to have new cooperage in here, is because the minute you put something in new white American oak, you're guaranteed a certain style of whiskey. You can only split that hair so many ways. You remove that, all of a sudden, there is an enormous bandwidth to produce really interesting whiskey. That means that Texas, Virginia, New York, and Washington can all do something that you as a consumer will get what it means on the label, but not have to worry that you're basically just buying, you know, a dressed up version of the same liquid. To me, that's not interesting.
I think you'll find that theme a lot as we get through this today. We're not trying to make a copy of Scotch whiskey in America. You have to recognize the geographical realities of what we're talking about. And when Chris and I go overseas and when we talk to folks, you know, people just don't have a concept of how big this country really is. If you think about the Scotch whiskey industry in particular, the Japanese whiskey industry, right? These are very small geographic regions, right? If we were just trying to emulate that, replicate that here, we're missing a big opportunity to have regional influences in what is an enormous country comparatively. So you'll see a lot of that theme coming through again and again and again. Is there a question?
Does the definition, when you say made from 100% malted barley, imply that coloring, any other type of additives are, because sometimes that's a big deal for consumers, especially with, with Scotch, is people, the debate about coloring.
Sure, I'll answer that and then to one aspect and then let you guys get into the additives. But we wrote this specifically and with the language that the TTB is used to using very specifically so that it doesn't imply anything. There are no implications in our definition. Our definition is limited to what we're saying here, which again, to Chris's point, is going to open up options for people to make choices. Again, one of the things that we try to distinguish from the Scotch Whisky Association is they are very myopic and very rigid about their definition. And even when people do interpret that, they have a very strong opinion about those interpretations, right? We wanted to leave enough latitude in our definition for innovation, for creativity, and make the clauses in the definition very specific. So the answer to your question is no, it doesn't imply that. It leaves the choice up to other people.
So,
you guys can speak to...
So what you're saying is you can color it. Sure. That's a choice that the definition allows you to color whiskey.
In the definition of whiskey as a class, you're allowed to do that.
In your definition, it allows your product to be colored.
Now you see, this is it, and it's an interesting because you're raising the point that is the general category.
There's a distinction.
Yeah.
For instance, many people, and I'm sure you also get this question, you'll have bourbon and rye and single malt on the table, and somebody will say, "Well, I want some whiskey," and can I try your whiskey? And you try to explain to them that all of them are whiskey. It's the type name that distinguishes it. And what you can make it and put it in a used barrel and just call it whiskey. But if you want to call it bourbon whiskey or rye whiskey or wheat whiskey, you have to put it in a new charred oak barrel. So the government doesn't tell you what you can make, they tell you what you can call it. So we could still make a single malt and put it in a used barrel. We couldn't call it single malt whiskey.
No, I get that. I guess maybe I'm thick, so I apologize if it's me, but did you have a discussion about whether or not to be explicit about actually adding artificial coloring to color the whiskey so it looks like a particular consistent color? That is a big issue for consumers.
Yes. I don't remember, maybe somebody else remembers whether that came up or not. I am guessing that with the people that were present in that room, it never occurred to any of us.
Do you think it should?
I don't know.
No, I don't. I think the latitude to do what you want to do is important within the respects that you're speaking to. Coloring, things of that nature. Westland, for instance, we do not chill filter, we do not add coloring. We're very explicit about that on our packaging. And it's up to the distiller to distinguish themselves or not on things like that.
And there is wiggle room in the definitions. For instance, we have a rye whiskey. When we empty our bourbon barrels, we send them to a guy in Vermont who makes maple syrup. He fills them with maple syrup right off the condensers, leaves it sitting there for 4 or 5 months. When he empties them, he sends them back to us, and we fill them with rye whiskey. And we don't have to call it a flavored whiskey because we're not adding anything in. We could add up to, I'm not sure how much percentage is.
2.5%?
It might be 2.5%.
2.5%.
Of coloring or flavoring into it, or sugar. But, the stuff that the alcohol is pulling out of the wood doesn't meet that criteria. So in one sense, we are adding it because we're pulling this influence from the maple out of the wood that's been impregnated in there by the sugar maker. But in another sense, we're not flavoring it because we're not actually putting anything in the whiskey. Yeah. And so we don't have to say flavored on the label.
Hold on, another question.
The other part of that, though, that of adding stuff in looking at a global marketplace, especially like maybe for Germany or something like that,
yeah.
will you allow it, but in your definition, you have to state it? So, caramel coloring obviously being the top front that you have to have it for Germany anyways. Is that something that you're gonna look for so that basically if you do it, you gotta say it?
I mean, as a consumer, I would like that.
Yeah.
No, I think everybody here would. There's nothing wrong with it, but you should know it. I look for variations in the color of the whiskey that I have. It means that no one's really screwing around with anything, so they could be this year different than last year because whatever, barrel, whatever, age, whatever. But I want to know that you're putting something in there, and I'd like to know it. Because I'll tell you what, Knob Creek, I had a discussion with Fred one time about unchill filtered. And did you know Knob Creek's not chill filtered? It isn't. But he doesn't think it's important to put it on his label. Where a lot of us would say, if you're not doing it right now, it's important. Because we all want to know that it's not chill filtered, right? So you can do what you want, but you also want, what's the biggest thing that's causing all the controversy in anything for whiskey right now, from where it's sourced to how it's made, right? Transparency. They don't care, consumers don't care as long as you tell us what you're doing.
So I'd like to just add into something that there is no better judge and jury in the American whiskey industry than a consumer with a wallet. There's no one better. You buy what you believe in, and if the producer doesn't provide you the transparency, tell them you don't agree with your wallet. I know what we put on the label. I'm extremely comfortable with the information that we put on a bottle of Wesson because I know that that is the way that we believe whiskey should be made. But it's to each individual producer to do what they are comfortable with, and it's on you as a consumer, with a wallet, with a mind, to decide whether or not you want to support someone that's not willing to make those things.
Yeah, but that sort of gets, just as plain devil's advocate that grew up in the supermarket business, we're starting to get into the buyer beware thing.
Yeah.
You know, like everything goes as long as we look online or talk to other people and figure out what they're doing. To a certain extent, okay, but if you're really adding stuff into the whiskey, I really should know that. It's sort of like, are you putting carcinogen in it, or is it just,
yes.
There's just the liquid, there's just the alcohol? Why are you blocking his thing on? Are you implying something, sir? No, but just, what you're putting, if you're putting something else that's not in the natural process of making whiskey, then I think that's up for grabs. So I don't think I have to look for that.
Well, but you already do, right? We go upstairs, do you know what products you've got on the shelf that have caramel coloring in them or not? You don't.
No.
Of course. So pragmatically, what we would, to argue for that, we would be asking both the SWA and the TTB to do something that they currently do not do.
Are you going to ship to Germany? You're talking about setting something up. I just wanted to play devil's advocate. You're talking about setting something up for a global marketplace. You have a lot of other places that do require it. Why are you going to do it for one country but not another?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I actually can't. I know that in Germany it is legally required to disclose spirit caramel coloring on the packaging. I'm not actually familiar with any other markets that require it as of the moment.
There's already a difference in labeling requirements for markets.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about changing anything.
Yeah.
That's already a fact. If you got to disclose it for there, I've got to put the logo with the pregnant lady on the back for EU and UK already. Like that 700.
Yeah.
That already exists. And the TTP is not going to regulate that. SWA doesn't regulate it. The EU doesn't regulate it. Except for these certain countries require different things on the label. So we'll have to comply with that.
Yeah,
I don't see why that requires any
I'm just saying, I understand there's certain things that you want to do, and there's no reason to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
I understand about that, but if you're starting a new category, let's fix it. I'm almost advocating for let's fix the problems that we actually know about that are not occurring in other things. But I can also understand, let's take the path of least resistance. I get both sides.
It gets back to the pragmatism. If we're going to ask the entire EU or the US to start regulating something they don't want to police, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, we'll talk.
I think the other point I make is that this isn't something that's very specific only to American Single Malt.
No, it's not.
If we want that done, we want it done at the super category level, not the sub.
Yeah, we can't get into change sizes right now, so.
Right.
Yeah,
So if we were trying to make that happen, we'd want to make it happen for all whiskeys, so that consumers had a standard, not just that the American Single Malt category specifically had that issue.
But also, there's a way to get you guys out in the front of everybody, saying, we're the guys that are coming up with single malt. We want all the categories to change too. It's putting you guys at the forefront, because the more people that know about your crusade and what you're doing, the more support you will have from grassroots of consumers, rather than
You know what I'm saying? So it might be a strategic you might want to look at.
I've got 2 quick ones. Oh man, it just took just long enough you pointing at me for me to forget one of them.
I got one thing.
Oh man.
You don't have either of them now, do you?
The protecting consumer thing, that's what they always tell you, right? That these labeling laws are about protecting consumers and making sure that what they buy is what's in there. One of my favorite things to do with tastings is, do we know what straight means? And then the people that don't raise their hand, like, okay, then let's just ask you.
That's the point.
Let's ask you, who you're not saying, hey, I know what that means. So what do you think if it means if I have a corn whiskey, then I have a straight one? Like, well, that one's got 100% corn. Like, well, no, that's not what it means. It means 2 years. Is that common sense? No, it's not. I've tried to put stuff on bottlings that had entry proof, and if it got transferred, so I've got multiple proofs and ABVs and ages, and they were like, 1 age, 1 ABV, you're confusing people. So when you say, yeah, consumers want more information, that's true. I do too. They don't actually support that. They get confused. That sounds like our budget's lower than it was 2 years ago. We're not going to have compliance issues. We're not going to police that. We're not going to give them their money.
This is a really interesting point that you guys bring up, and Ryan, you said it. We have to walk that line of what's pragmatic, and what is idealistic, right? And the one thing that coming together as a trade body, as a commission, allows us to do is advocate for things. We don't need to write something in a petition to the TTB to advocate for it. Everybody up here would advocate for what you're saying, right? Transparency in everything. We'd love to write everything we can on a label and on our website and tell everybody exactly what's in it. But we also have to recognize that it's important for the category to gain a foothold. Right? And the TTB hasn't changed the rules about what you can call spirits in this country for over 30 years. We had a very small window of opportunity to get into that conversation and get into the update that is currently happening slowly, and we'll talk about that in a second. The last thing that we wanted to do was make it more complicated for us to be included on something that frankly should be an industry-wide, whiskey-wide thing. So we'll continue to advocate for those things, and having discussions like this feed us with topics to be discussing, and we'll do that. But we have to separate that sometimes from the legislative process, which is immensely frustrating, difficult, and slow.
I was up on the hill for 2 days.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about, so don't worry about it.
The question of consumer awareness has been sort of dogging all of us for the last few years, especially with the realization that some people were sourcing whiskey elsewhere, and then, for instance, in New York, they bring bulk whiskey into New York, bottle it in New York, and on the label they would put produced by. And who among most consumers knows that that doesn't necessarily mean they made it? It means they were the last person to touch it before the bottle got sealed. So I think that that's among the regulatory changes that they've introduced, is that it has to stay distilled by or bottled. There's a difference between produced by, bottled by, distilled by. And that was
specificity.
Yes, and that was among the small distillers. That has been a hot topic for a while now, and with the exposure of some distillers who were doing that and not being completely straightforward about where their whiskey came from, it hurt them terribly, and that made all of us much more acutely aware of the need for specificity on the label, not just general terms like produced by.
Yeah, I'd like to get in, while we're talking about it, let's talk about the regulatory process and what we've done. You have the definition in front of you in the brochure. We're happy to talk about that as we get into more of the Q&A. Not that we haven't already gotten into the Q&A, but we can come back to those. But since we're on this topic, the TTB, like I mentioned, has not updated what's called the BAM, the Beverage Alcohol Manual, in over 30 years. The last time they did it, they weren't even part of the Treasury Department. So there's really a lack of institutional knowledge for even understanding how to go about this process, let alone the fact that it is a legislative action in the middle of what is a pretty frenzied environment in DC, and Garrett can certainly talk about that, he lives there. But we petitioned with our standard of identity way back in October of 2017. They did not even propose a rule for more than a year later. That rule, which the proposed changes document, which Ralph just referenced, was 144 pages long. What is the reality is that a lot of the things that have even come in the past few years, American Single Malt being one of them, barrel-aged gin being another one, they weren't included in the 144 pages. We were certainly disappointed to see that, but what we were told and what we've come to understand is that that document was actually probably written a few years ago. And rather than go to the effort of changing that, they relied on the public comment period to accommodate other questions, challenges, and things of that nature. That public comment period was supposed to be 180 days. If you all remember, the government shut down for a while, so that got extended and extended and extended. It finally closed in June, and I had actual conversations with that sounds funny, right? Actual conversations with the TTB. And look, I personally, you guys can do what you want, but I personally don't want to stand up here and bash the TTB. You have to understand that they actually have an enormous task at hand just doing their day-to-day thing. Every single label of everything that has alcohol in this country goes through that office of like 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, shrinking staff.
Yeah, it's so...
And shrinking budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Every year.
And shrinking budget, and the fact that they're folded under the Treasury Department, which they weren't, so they've never done this before. You have to cut them a little slack, right? They have a ton on their plate. They're in a regulatory environment that is very difficult to navigate with everything going on in this country. I'm sorry, as much as we want it to be, we're not the top priority in Washington. We should be.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Up until only the last few years, they dealt with imports and with maybe a dozen distillers, big distillers around the country. Now there are 1,800 small distillers that have just been added to that list.
Yeah.
And all those freaking breweries too.
And the breweries, every beer label that you see.
You want to talk about disruptors to the whole system right now? Breweries. All over the place. Every state, up on the hill, federally and state level, brewers are causing as much havoc as they possibly can. They're trying to go linear. I'm not bashing anybody.
Yeah, they're sucking the oxygen out of the room.
Huh?
They're sucking the oxygen out of the room.
They have basically, what was that, the zombie one, they keep coming and they keep coming until you're totally covered. That's what they're doing to almost everything that's up on the hill right now, and you can't, there's no wading through it. States, I just met with about 25 different states talking about what's happening regulatory. Every state is the same thing. Massachusetts, just so you know, is at the leading forefront of that because Sam Adams is funding it all. So in this state, Sam Adams is funding almost all of it. So every time you see something come down the pipe, look to how it affects Sam Adams and you'll see what's actually happened. So,
yeah, I
digress.
I can speak for Westland. Westland, we release 4 to 5 limited releases a year for which we have to get a new COLA, which is the approval to have a label. Breweries lap that in a couple of weeks. Seasonal releases, all kinds of different things. So the beer guys are definitely sucking the air out of the room. But I was able to finally talk to somebody during the process for petitioning to have our standard of identity included. They actually called me. They reached out to me and they said, we want to make sure you fill this out right. And I said, thank you. Which box to check, which word to put in that field, et cetera, et cetera. That's really encouraging. They're supportive of this. But when I asked him when is this going to happen, he was honest with me. He said, this is going to take a year at least. And that's not just for American Single Malt Whiskey. That's for the entirety of that 144-page document, right? So, and he said at best, we've got an election coming next year. This could take years. This could take years, which is why we're here. The regulatory process is important. To have a formal standard of identity is important for protecting this category and what is being made here. But what's more important, frankly, is that you guys understand what we're doing. That people like Ryan understand what we're doing. And they are the ones that advocate for you guys talking about this as a category makes it a category. right? This is just all about what we can put on the label. And I can tell you what, well, we have Gary on, bad example. But if you look at any core range whiskeys from Westland, it says American Single Malt on one line, and it says whiskey on another line. As far as the TTB is concerned, we are classified as whiskey. That's it. They don't even see the American Single Malt part. When we get this ratified, and we will get this ratified, we're not going to change our label. It's going to say the same thing. So what's most important is that everybody in this room and everybody beyond this room starts to recognize this guy.
Steve, have you, just out of think, because you're doing that, and because you guys have, as a group, have agreed that this is what you want to see going forward, and you're already sort of adhering to all the rules you want to take in place, so in other words, you could put it in a new barrel and switch it the next day, so you're setting up how you want it to be done. And quite frankly, you can almost do that right now.
Yes.
Are you all, as a group, saying that this is what we're going to do? Because if that's the case, why aren't you doing it as a group and everybody agrees and basically write your independence, your Declaration of Independence, and put your commission stamp on everybody's bottle?
What a brilliant idea, right? That is something that we're working on right now.
So you know,
making that available.
What you as a consumer would already know what you would expect from that product. Would that be something you guys would like?
Yes. Absolutely. That is definitely something that we're working on the logistics of now. Stickers that we can all add to our bottle that identify you as a member, which means you're subscribing to this definition.
Right.
Every one of those 140 people on that list subscribe to that definition.
Right.
We've done a similar thing in New York with the Empire Rye Association.
Yep.
We got together all of the distillers in New York who were making rye, and we all agreed on a simple, straightforward definition in much the same way as you've done here for what we would consider to be Empire Rye. We protected the name with copyright. We formed an association, and we got the governor to sign a proclamation declaring a rye week. And Empire Rye as a New York rye, and we give out stickers.
You'll notice that Jared's the only one rubbing his neck because he's the only one up here whose team actually has to put stickers on. And all of us are like, great idea. Question over here.
Thank you. So piggybacking what Ryan said, you as a group, I'm pretty sure there are producers of American Single Malt that don't agree with elements.
There are.
The case in point, I know, like Sons of Liberty that I think we're supposed to be here, they have what they call single malt, which is malted grain, essentially. It's malted barley, malted rye. So there's an Christmas element that is supposed to be malted barley. And I find it, but
exactly.
So how do you reconcile with everybody? Do you need to reconcile?
It's going to be impossible to reconcile with everyone. You have to build consensus. You put something up, and you hope that that allows you to get to a place where as many people as humanly possible are comfortable with that definition. There's nothing that we're going to be able to send to the TTB that is going to have 100% buy-in from everyone. It's just not going to happen. In the case specifically of this, the idea of other grains being involved, malted grains, I will say this, there is, in my mind, a common sense approach here that is single malt is globally understood to be a single distillery, 100% malted barley. There's no reason that we should muddy that water by just saying in America all of a sudden you can add rye, you can add wheat, you can add all these things. I really see that as a dangerous slope. We need to accept it for what we've sort of seen globally. We can build on the strength of the concept of single malt and frankly provide a fresh new voice directly from America in that.
So then would you extrapolate it to blended malt, for instance, or something like that to include those who don't make just 100% malted barley?
I know Mike, I wish he was here because it'd be fun to have him be a part of this conversation. But I don't know exactly how they make that product. But there's a category for all the three options. It's either already American malt whiskey because it's a new barrel. It's just whiskey if it's made in both. It's whiskey made from a malt mash if it's made and used. And it's distilled spirit specialty if it's finished. So there's already a category for any way that they're making that product. That is not American Single
Malt. We call American Single Malt.
So,
And the reason that he has a bottle that says American Single Malt, and he's a very interesting situation, and again, not to bash the TTB, they have a difficult job, but it depends on whose desk it lands on when you send a label in, right? He actually has a whiskey, that PX whiskey that he does, which is 100% single malt whiskey, and it says American Single Malt Whiskey on one line. Supposedly, that's not supposed to be legal, because that doesn't exist right now. We're trying to make that exist. So that's why it's important. Right now, anybody, it's a bit of the Wild West out there. That's a reason that we're doing this. And I had a conversation with Mike, and he understands that if this goes through, when this goes through, he's going to have to change the name of some of the things. And he understands that, and he's behind that, right? It's exactly the question that we get all the time. Why not other malts? Because that's not what the world considers single malt, right? And yes, there are other designations for almost anything that you can do, except for this, frankly. And rather than have less categorizations, we want more, because we want you all to know exactly what you're getting. We don't want the ambiguity out there.
I just wonder whether or not that puts the same handcuffs on American distillers that the SWA puts on their distillers. If we, I mean, limiting malt to only malted barley is my question. And yes, indeed, it's what everybody understands to be single malt, but the fact is that there are two definitions of single malt. There's the colloquial definition, and then there's the one we know among the distillers. And so I guess my question would be, is a change like that more inclined if we included other malt, all malted, one malted grain, all malted rye, for instance? And just one more. If we did that, would that not offer more opportunity as long as you identify the grain on the label?
once again, that already exists. Malt, without a qualifier, according to the TTB, is malted barley. If it's malted anything else, you qualify it by, you can do a single rye malt. Knock yourself out. They require already, so we would be asking them to change other categories. I mean,
nobody in the commission is against someone saying American Single Malt rye at all.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just comes back to the colloquial definition, and the ultimate goal that we have to pursue is transparency to the consumer. And I think if none of us ever existed, if American Single Malt never existed, we asked anybody in the room, what do you think of when you think of single malt? There'd be very, very few people that wouldn't say that it's 100% malted barley, whether you're talking about Ireland or Japan or Scotland. So to me, I think if we did include multiple things, it would really go over the line of the goal of having consumers know exactly what they're drinking.
Well, aren't one of your definitions?
Hold on. And 3, 2, 1, go.
But isn't one of your definitions 100%?
malted barley.
It's 100% malted barley. But in the, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the definition of malted anything, it's only 51%. So if they, so then the problem becomes, if single malt means 100% malted barley, then why can't single malt mean 100% malted rye as well?
Well, once again, the variant would be, if they stick consistent with the language they've used historically, the variant would be American Single Rye Malt Whiskey.
Oh.
With no qualifier,
Right.
it would imply barley,
Okay.
just like the current regulation.
Right, so the single malt itself would imply barley, but then
Unless you
anything
qualify.
else would then have the addition of whatever that grain was.
Yeah, just an additional level of specificity.
Okay, yeah, okay. And that's what, I'm sorry, that's what you're advocating for.
Correct.
That's right, that's what the commission is advocating for.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm seeing how it fits. So there is whiskey, then right now there's malt whiskey. Yours, one would assume, would be under malt whiskey as a single malt whiskey.
It would be over it.
Oh,
The TTB doesn't look at them in a hierarchical form.
well, that's how it's
Right.
written. If you look at them, there's spirit, whiskey, then there's,
The
And
subtype.
there's everything else.
Yep.
Right.
There's bourbon, there's straight
So
bourbon.
where would single malt fit in
Under
that?
It would
Under whiskey.
fall under whiskey as the broadest category.
Yes.
So here's what you have to do, legally speaking, to produce whiskey. Here are the secondary set of sort of markers that would allow you to call yourself American Single Malt Whiskey.
So it will be on the malt whiskey.
Well, it's not a tree.
It doesn't branch like that.
All the bourbon regs are listed individually, and then wheat, and then malt, and then, they're not, there's not a hierarchy.
Like to put this in perspective, the concept of straight isn't associated with any single whiskey type. It's actually its own set of specifications, and then you can add that on to another one dependent on it.
But I think that's logically, from consumer standpoint, malt whiskey, then single malt would be another malt whiskey, but more narrowed down.
Yeah, the challenge is that malt whiskey is so clearly specified as 51% malt, and there's the new oak component. That's something that I can tell you from a personal perspective, that scares the hell out of me. I don't want there to be any sort of focal point on this is what your cask has to be. Because quite frankly, I think this has been to the detriment of a majority of the whiskey industry. The minute you start to enforce a cask style, you are going to immediately filter things into a very focused profile and taste, and that's a bad thing. That's the exact opposite of what we want up here. I want to make sure, frankly, I love these guys. We believe in all the whiskeys that they're making, but I don't want to make their whiskey. I want our whiskeys to be as unique as humanly possible. I want our whiskeys to speak to who we are as people in our region, where we are from. All of those things are important. The minute you specify a casking type, you're basically saying it's okay, well, we want you all to be a little more similar. That, as a consumer, you should want the polar opposite of that. You should want a guarantee of quality, but not a guarantee of taste.
When was the first, historically, you're probably the best person to maybe answer this question, when would that have been even put in place?
The
New oak, as part of the
39.
definitions. 39?
39. But people were doing it before that.
And not.
Well, yeah, but it was almost a de facto standard by then.
Yeah.
It became law in 39, but, and the other thing, I hate to go right against it, but it works really well for bourbon. Don't fuck up bourbon.
Listen, they have their right to that, and if that's what bourbon producers want, by all means, that is, in my mind, it's become such an enforceable part of the definition, it's such a big part of the storytelling, that's fine. I can tell you from an American Single Malt producer perspective, I don't want, the only thing that I'm focusing on is what I can't do and not what I can do.
I'm fine with that. It was the way you were saying it was making me.
Oh, yeah, no, listen, I can't imagine the hate mail we would get if I actually said we should change bourbon as well.
Jim Rutledge would come and tell you.
I think I can take Jim.
Questions in the back.
No, you can't now. You can't now.
Please yell it out so we can hear you.
Hi, so I guess so just a little bit of background. I work for Big Pharma, so I'm sort of used to the whole regulatory defines everything you do very strictly, and you have to abide by that and sort of figure out how to work within that structure. And so I really respect and appreciate that you're doing what you can to do that. And I'm actually personally very enthusiastic about the idea of having these sort of broad definitions that allow a lot of diversity and creativity in what's happening. But I guess where I'm getting a little bit confused is where when it comes to things like ingredients that put into medications I'm releasing to market, or when it comes to food products, we have to be very explicit about what goes into it, and we have to be very clear about that. But when it comes to the idea of additives, or when it comes to the idea of calling out what kind of grain is actually going into the product that we're getting, as opposed to being inferred from just the American Single Malt, you have to just know that this is a barley, and it makes it more difficult for a consumer who might be an avid enjoyer of it, but not necessarily wonky on the details. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about the fact that it sounds like there's a bit of that fire where you need to just know this, do your research, figure it out, whereas for the rest of the market, the assumption is people are busy, people have lives, people enjoy what they enjoy, want to spend money with what they want to spend it on, and so we have to make it transparent to them, and we have to work with those restrictions that consumers have to be able to have that understanding explicit in our product.
Once again, all of this is already part of TTB code of what they require and don't require for whiskey. There's one category that comprises something like 90% of the whiskey made in America, if not 98, 99, and that's bourbon. They have a huge lobby.
Yeah.
And their category is the only one protected from that stuff. Everybody else, you only have to say it if it's over 2.5%. So, once again, if we're going to the TTB and saying, hey, we sure would like for you guys to recognize American Single Malt, and by the way, change your whiskey definition. Global. We're just not going to have, nothing's going to happen. So I appreciate it, and we may all decide to put it on. But it's like I was just pointing out, probably over half the scotch he's got upstairs has coloring in it, and like it's not disclosed. And if it's not bourbon made in the U.S., it's not disclosed. We can assume it's less than 2.5%. They don't have to say anything. I don't see them going to change that for us.
Yeah, ultimately the onus is on us as individual producers and the TTB, and frankly, and you guys to demand it from those two people.
I would love to see it change globally, for sure.
I would also argue that there's a fourth party involved in that, which is your organization, who can say, this might legally fit the definition of American Single Malt, but we will require our members to abide by these labeling requirements.
Yeah, that's a super interesting idea, the idea of additional components.
We can discuss that internally. Yeah. The efforts for the last few years have been about getting the standard of identity passed, which cannot really include that. But yeah, we can do that internally. I mean, that's going to be fun to talk about.
Certainly something that we'd be happy
I'd vote for it.
Happy to bring you the membership, and Jared would vote, everybody up here would vote for it. So that's an interesting idea, absolutely.
But that's why I said about the stamp. It's an automatic thing you're looking to do. We're already doing it. We're just waiting for everybody else to catch up.
Right.
Yep. What's coming around?
Right, Josh, right here. Let's let her have a chance.
But I also know that on food labeling, you can't just put anything you want on the label. Is that the same thing? With alcohol, you can't just put anything on your label that you want.
Absolutely.
Even if you want to disclaim things that are in the food business. So there are certain things that we would love to put on the label for our consumers, and they just won't let us. The FDA and USDA will not let us. So there's certain things that you can't put on labels even if you want to.
This is very similar to the TTB. Just because it doesn't exist on the label doesn't mean that a producer's not trying to tell you. It means that they might not be allowed to, quite frankly.
There's a number of instances where the FDA and the TTB do not agree on matters concerning whiskey. The example that comes to mind is, I'm sorry.
Well, they're going around it then.
The example that comes to mind, I'm sorry, it just doesn't come to my mind. I remember that.
Why do you remember?
Nobody's saying it.
That's the right argument right there.
What is it, Ralph?
Now I've forgotten again.
Oh, God!
It happens, you know.
What are you guys drinking? Can we have some?
Okay, we've got about 45 minutes.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Go, quick.
Quickly, Ralph.
I got it. It had to do with,
Now you're just talking about
I was brought in as the comic relief here today. I don't really
And this is why all rules need to be written down.
We got about 45 minutes here. Really, the rest of our presentation is questions, so I'm happy to just have you guys ask the questions, and if it stops, I'll flip through the slides. So
your standard of identity very closely mirrors that of Single Malt Scotch. But the notable exception is length of maturation. Why not?
Because there's absolutely no correlation between quality and maturation length. Zero.
And I'll go to my usual answer for almost everything that gets asked about this. That is not currently part of any American whiskey definition other than age statement stuff straight, bonded, sure, specific categories, but there's no minimum age requirement for whiskey, and asking them to change that would be a non-starter.
3 years is a really broad range of climates in the United States, right?
Yes.
Thinking about Scotland, what I like to say is if you go to Scotland or Ireland, my mom lives over in Ireland, if I go in January or if I go in July, my suitcase kind of looks the same. Right? Versus if you're coming to Virginia in the winter, you want to have a good ski jacket on. If you're coming in the summer, well, you can wear
Not much.
Exactly. And
let's not get too far.
Well, it's scary, guys. Oh, it's scary.
And the climates between Virginia and New York and Texas and Washington, I mean, those are four different climates versus Ireland or Scotland where it's a lot tighter. And so that's going to have a huge impact on what the right time for maturation is. And if 3 years is right for Scotland, we have a huge range in the U.S.
So again, and I think you're raising some really good points to be totally transparent, and these are good things for frankly all of us to be thinking about. I will point out though, there's an interesting point where some of you are asking for more specificity and regulation, but that also limits the freedom of producers, which means you're going to get a more controlled, frankly less varied product, and I would argue that's actually the worst possible outcome.
Wouldn't that be like the American whiskey designation though? Because that's the broadest designation that you've got. I mean, it's literally a playground for anything in that way.
Well, unless there's a category that articulates what you do more specifically than you are legally required to use the more specific category.
Yeah.
We already have age statement. If we're under 4, you got to tell me how old this is already anyway. So to me, the information's there.
Just a reminder, the microphone is for Mark's podcast. It does not project your voice. So speak up, please.
Not having some sort of standard for labeling, does that kind of blur the line between disclosure and marketing? In other words, what you leave out or what you put in could become more marketing than actual disclosure.
And it's already that way right now.
Yeah.
There's a pretty healthy, there's almost 13 things of membership. I mean, there's a checklist of things that literally have to be on the label. What you want to disclose in addition to that, you can put on, and your cola might get rejected because they say you can't have that on there. It is a bit of a back and forth game with the TTB at this point right now to get something pushed through.
By way of redemption, I actually wrote it down.
Can you read it?
The pen is money than the sword.
I'm not sure, my handwriting's not very good. But it came up when we wanted to put gluten-free on our vodka. All distilled products are gluten-free. The TTB says you have to test every batch in order to put it on your label. But because you can't guarantee that you've gotten all the gluten out. But the FDA has as one of its listed ways of removing gluten is distillation. So you can't put gluten-free on any alcohol distilled product unless you test every single batch. And in the case of a big producer, I guess they can take samples at different hours. But with us going batch production, that's a very expensive undertaking.
Well, yeah, you would also have to, there's plenty of contamination. If your milling is anywhere remotely close to refilling, you would get post-distillation contamination. And there's a lot of traditional use of wheat paste to patch up leaky barrels. So there are other ways gluten gets in after the fact that you have to account for. But
that's gluten always finds a way.
Question over here.
So gentlemen, as this commission is being put together, is there the availability of a consumer to participate in helping from that perspective, the consumer as well? I mean, my background is regulatory or the Navy. So.
Yes, please. Get him a seat up here.
I'm not prepared for that.
Yes, so I would encourage everybody to just go to the website, which is AmericanSingleMaltWhiskey.org. We have over, I think, 150 now member producers. We have over 400 general supporters. People like you, people like everybody in this room, people like Ryan from the trade, people like Lou and Mark from the media that are supporting us by following along, basically. And there are lots of people like you who are offering help, and we're glad to take that help. I mean, we have busy lives running distilleries as well and trying to get those businesses to be successful. And this is something that we've poured ourselves into because we know it's important, but all the help we can get, yes, please.
I mean, even more directly during the comment period, when that does come along, definitely jump in on that. I did that. So
Lou actually put some stuff out. Ashley did too. The other thing is too is you guys, since you're creating a commission, you have all these, you're doing these resources, is maybe taking a page out of maybe John Glazier and anybody that is involved with the organization can put up a spec page on anything that they produce and sort of break down exactly what's going on with that particular whiskey. So that if the consumer wants to go and they can see the label that you're now putting on the bottle that says we are part of this group and we are adhering to a better standard, that you could actually go to the page for transparency purposes and see that whiskey. You could be obviously on the distillery page too, but as a resource to go to your page, having it, it also means that people are seeing more stuff that you're doing. and that would keep the general public more involved with your organization.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We're doing the same with folks like you, Ryan, where you are now certified. You know, you're going through what we would call a training here. You know, and
I was certified. We'll be waiting for this.
you know, you're someone that can be recognized by all these people as a person they can go to understand what's going on in any given bottle and whatnot. And that resource will be on our website now. And I like the idea of allowing our producers to do so as well. On the website, there's also a forum. So if you sign up to be a general supporter, you now have access to post on the public forum, and there can be a dialogue about this. Through our website as well. So that's all stuff that we're working on, yes. You guys really want to go through PowerPoint? It's actually a PDF. So I hate PowerPoint. It's the worst. I'll go through these. Any that's here's a good one. We get this a lot. Does the barley have to be sourced in the U.S.? Who wants to take that one?
Nobody?
Yeah, I'll take it.
So we all do, right?
Yeah. So you know, one of our consultants from Scotland, when he was helping fine tune our distillate, he had a really interesting kind of phrase of where your barley comes from. Is so long as it's high quality barley and it's going to make good whiskey, it doesn't necessarily matter, you know, where it went to prep school. And you know, that's certainly not in the, so that's not in the rules of any of the other countries, right? In terms of, you know, what they're making in Irish whiskey or what they're doing with Scotch whiskey. In fact, when you think of Scotch, I mean, we think of Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe there, and then, you know, in the U.S., our breadbaskets in the upper Midwest and going into Canada. Right. So I mean, whether it's on the Canadian side or the New York side, I don't think an invisible line is really what is going to make the barley higher quality or lower quality. At Virginia Distillery, we've used things we've imported from the UK. That's not Scottish, it came from the British Midlands. We've also used barley from upper Midwest, and you know, we asked a supplier one time, he's like, well, can you guarantee, you know, which farms and which side of the line? And they're like, we can't. You know,
That's no.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's I think it would go into that theme that we were talking about earlier of being overly restrictive. You know, at what point does it end? You know, does all your yeast have to come from the U.S.? Do your labels have to come from the U.S.? Do your stoppers come from the U.S.? Your pump? Does your equipment come? Yeah, exactly. German pumps? This isn't real American single malt. So
I'm talking to and this is going to be, I can hear the groans already, but Whistlepig, when they were trying to do a Vermont, the guys, they wanted to, they threw in water as one of the ingredients, which is fine, it came from a Vermont well, but then it threw off the proportions of everything else, because they were counting water as an ingredient, so it knocked the percentages down on everything, and they're like, really?
This same question came up in New York when we passed the Farm Distillery Act.
Yeah.
And we were trying to argue with the State Liquor Authority that, well, 90% of it's water from New York. And they said, did you grow it? And that was the distinguishing characteristic. It had to be grown in the United States.
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, grain wouldn't have been a revolutionary, historic event when we started cultivating it if it didn't have the properties it has, which is it's easy to store, it stores well, it's transportable, it's not grapes. So, I mean, historically, as beer, or if SWA is our definition of the most restrictive whiskey rules in the world, do they have that on there? Like, no, they don't. They don't. They're going to use Maris Otter. It doesn't have to be Scottish. It's fine. So yeah, it just seems
you can always
you'd be missing out on part of what's great about grain, is by making yourself just use it from here.
Yeah.
Is there a question, Connor?
There is. So I'm just out of my own curiosity because I honestly have no idea about this. So I know, like, with wines, you get like the terroir of the flavor for the same grape, different region. Does it happen with grains as well, or is that, are they pretty neutral depending on?
So I want to expand the question.
I would like to get in on this.
I want to expand the question.
Wesley was last on this.
First. I want to expand the question.
Robin might want to get in on this.
So the question is there terroir to the grain, to barley? And then I want to broaden that question as well. I want you guys to talk about regions. Is regionality a thing in American Single Malt Whiskey should it be a thing. So Chris.
Do we need to wait for Robin to take his hearing aids out? So
Go ahead.
Westland fundamentally believes that absolutely there is a sense of terroir in grain. Full stop. You don't have to say much more than that. I will say this, over the next few years, we'll be making releases that are highly specified to the region where the grain comes from, that we have in just early sampling from CASKS can recognize significant differences in the quality of the grain coming through. Absolutely. I also think, quite frankly, if that weren't the case, then you would only see monoculture large farms in 1 or 2 states and they would just pump it out there, and they don't. If you grow a potato in Connecticut, if you grow a potato in Maine, if you grow a potato in Idaho, they all taste different. Why shouldn't that extend past it? Of course it does in my mind. It's, in my mind, the fact that there is an argument to this is surprising because, quite frankly, everything that exists that grows grain is located in that place. That is literally, that sense of place is what terroir is all about. If you add on the cultural perspective, yeah, there's probably an argument there to go, well, how does that fit in? But from an agricultural perspective, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that and then let Jared go. But
Wesley gets to go twice before anybody else?
Yeah.
He's on the commission side.
Yeah,
He's the commission. He doesn't
Wesley get to go twice.
He gets to ask questions.
I was gonna give you some credit.
The floor recognizes Jared.
You mentioned, Jared, Maris Otter and Golden Promise, something that we've used at Westland to distill as well. But there are thousands of different varieties of barley that exist. But the whiskey industry, particularly the Scotch whiskey industry, has only really used a handful in hundreds of years. And those barleys, those varietals that they've chosen are chosen for sameness, right? They're chosen for the commodity system. Frankly, they're chosen for Budweiser, right? And the differences between those as they've moved from one to the other is really a choice of lesser cost and a little bit higher efficiency, right? But largely, the character of those grains are bred to fit the system that has been built to malt them, right? So if you step outside of those and look at some of the thousands of the others that are out there, you can start spreading a little farther away from that core flavor profile, and that's really what a lot of us are trying to do. Jared, please go. Would you like to stand up here?
No. If I go up there, I'm not supposed to give my opinion on this. I'm not supposed to talk.
He's on my team, and that was great.
I think to talk about variations year to year in soil or rainfall and how that affects a specific strain is, of course, that happens with every crop. To call that terroir without some controlled data, to me, seems a little, I'm open to the possibility of it, but just the same thing, you bring up Maris Otter and Golden Promise, like, yeah, they're not just grown in 2 different places, they have different genetic heritage. So that's not an example of terroir. But the sense of place idea is fantastic, and I think it can even go beyond, we don't have any, I don't even think Ryan's got any upstairs, but Brimstone's another example of that, of like, what personality and flavor does your area of the world use and celebrate? What exemplifies it? And use that. Whether the ingredient is actually from there or not, make something that kind of represents the personality and character of a place. And I'd love to see, I'd love to, well, I'm not even a big wine guy. Plenty of you guys know a lot more about wine than me. But even the wine world has been debating this for the last 2 decades. Does terroir even exist in wine, or is it all bullshit? So I'd love for us to throw our name in the hat for that conversation, but I think it's far from over, but it's fun to explore for sure.
I'd like to just broaden the concept of terroir, because for me, it's not just about the grain. It's about, as you said, about where it's grown, the territory, the climate conditions, but throughout the whiskey process, starting with taking the water out of the ground, it's going to be different from one place to the next. And so there's, as you said before, the weather conditions in New York are considerably different than down at Balcones or in Washington, D.C. So it isn't, the terroir is not just about the grain. It's about the entire process and location and how it's made. that establishes.
It's culture and agriculture. Terroir is not just one, it's both.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe you want, wait, Robin, don't, please.
Yeah, back first.
I'm gonna hold you back for just 1 second.
No, back first.
I know it, because
Hurry up,
this
get that man a mic.
this is something that, I know, he's killing himself right now.
Let's get that in front of Robin.
Yes.
Okay, so here's my counter to all of that. So this thing I'm sitting in here is called a what? A chair. And this thing right here I've got in front of me is called a what? It's called a table. Now there's a lot of similarities between the two of them, but when we start calling one thing another thing, then we confuse an enormous amount of things. What does terroir mean? Literally from the French, of the earth. Of the earth, right? Now when we get to wine, and I can appreciate the wine conversation on this as well, we've got 4 or 5 steps between a grape that grows on a vine and the thing that's in my glass. And the only transformation that was actually done in there, which is a natural fermentation. I don't really need anyone at all to make wine. I can take some grapes and put them in my pocket and let them naturally ferment, and essentially I've got wine.
See him do it.
I gotta be honest with you, you gotta dry clean those pants.
I'm not gonna tell you which part either. But you guys are all involved in actually a manufacturing facility. And essentially what you're doing is you're making chemical changes to something natural. You're putting essentially an alcoholic mash into a bullet and under pressure and then applying heat to it, and you're making chemical changes in it. As a matter of fact, when you look at the entire distillation process, there's chemical change being made all the time. And so for me, that actually then eliminates the word or the concept of terroir. However, what that does mean, I was just having this conversation earlier today, we put the same distillate in 2 different barrels, and then we tasted it, and they were completely different. So how can that be terroir? The word that I think that I'm an advocate of actually using, which I think describes all of this, is provenance. And provenance is from the origin. Now that takes into effect everything: the water, the soil, the grain, the fermentation time, the type of still, all of the wood management process over that, and most importantly, because you are manufacturers, it takes into account the savoir-faire of the distiller. Because if you take the distiller out of there, you really got nothing, right? I can make wine in my pocket, as we've already described. You can't make whiskey without any of you. And that is not terroir. So with all of that together, I just think provenance becomes the actual word we should be using to describe this particular or any distilled product. Because then it separates it from that. And it's not really about from the earth anymore. It has all of these other different things that are added on top of it.
Maybe we should stick to English.
As a rule, if you have to use French, I don't like it.
Louis, I'm joking, but it's true. We talk a lot about craft, and that's in here as well. I mean, the word terroir is difficult for Americans, and nobody really gets it.
But they can't even
totally
say it.
agree. Provenance, to us, it's about, does the grain matter? Does the grain influence flavor? We believe we've proven that to be the case.
And it has an aspect.
If we don't use the word terroir, fine. It's hard to say for most people anyway. Great.
Robin, if I were to say, I'm going to say a statement, and I want you to tell me if in your mind this is true, because I think it's a fair thing worth asking. Grain, cereal grain, malted barley, or barley has terroir, whiskey has provenance. Is that true to you?
So I'm sorry.
Barley has terroir, whiskey has provenance.
That would make actually a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that would actually.
And I would agree. So in the capacity of that, I firmly agree with you.
Yeah.
Our grain showcases unique terroir. We can taste it in our mash, which I appreciate is a part of a process.
Right.
But let's be transparent. If you ground up some barley with your boots and added water, you are effectively mashing to a certain degree.
Right. But you haven't got, as soon as you start actually messing around with the chemical composition, then the terroir argument actually goes out the
I
window.
don't necessarily
It
have
happens both.
I don't have a disagreement with
Yeah.
that. I think
Yeah.
the raw ingredients have terroir.
Yeah.
At Westland, we believe firmly in the concept of raw ingredient.
Yeah.
It's why we spend so much time thinking about raw ingredient selection. I agree. Our whiskey has a sense of place. It certainly has problems.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the argument, the argument can be made is then why can't you make whiskey that tastes the exact same every time? Why do you batch stuff? Why do you put stuff in to try to make a common thread? Because technically, there is difference. I mean, most of it we can actually describe to wood, but in each time that you do that, unless you're doing it the exact temperature change to the exact cut points, to the exact everything, including put it out so you can only be the barrel that can be the only change. Because even the rick house is a change. If I'm up in the little northwest corner and I have sunlight on it, if I have this, why are you taking all of that stuff and putting it in batches to even it out? Every single barrel should taste the same.
I'd like to address that.
Yeah.
When we started out, every batch was different. And I would go into a retailer or a restaurant or a bar, and they would take the bottle off the shelf and hold it up next to the one I was trying to sell them and say, look, there's a different color. How can it be so? I said, it's craft. It's handmade. But let me just tell you that worked in the beginning. But the fact of the matter is that in order to sell a product, it needs to be consistent.
No, but you're making it consistent. You're actually taking
the barrels
and making it consistent.
and the spot in the rail changes everything.
I know, but that's sort of the point. That is the flavor differentiations that you're automatically getting from the same distillery. You're not, in other words, when you're coming off the still, no matter which one I take off the still, that new make should taste exactly the same every single time. It's the other factors that are happening afterwards.
Yes.
But I would argue that it doesn't necessarily always taste the same coming off the still every single time.
Well, of course not, because the grain doesn't.
But I'm saying, but that's some of the stuff that you're tasting.
We would have people all the time, and I'm sure you guys get it too, visitors come to it, I love your product, this is art, you're an artist. And I would always say, the only person on our property that's an artist is the blender. Because he's the one who takes all the raw materials and makes sure that it's our product. That
It stays the same every time. That's what you're going, I get that's what you're going for. And I'm not arguing either way. I'm just saying, but that's just the logistics of what is happening. And I think I also think that's the beauty of it. I'm not just degrading it. And I think Jared should have the floor for the next 15 minutes because
I don't want it for nearly that long. Gabe can correct me if I'm wrong, but to address the very first point that Robin was making, the amount of natural wine being made in the world is probably less than 1%. It's being pitched. So, nice idea, not relevant to reality. Especially if you make a comparison between the wine industry and ours, that's not what they're doing, unfortunately. Second thing, the consistency argument off the stills is specifically talking about pot. Your column is going to make extremely consistent identical, almost chemically identical, over 99.5% the same.
that's why we have Tito's. Yeah.
Well, but yeah, the barrel is also an agricultural product.
Right.
So of course there's variation, and if you guys, the consumers who pay our bills and keep our lights on, get super comfortable with batches not tasting the same, smelling the same, having different color every time, we will gladly give you that. But the biggest selling brands in the world are the whiskey equivalent of McDonald's and Applebee's, and people demand that every bottle they get, no matter what country, state, year, if that tastes different, damn it, they're not buying it again. So that's a market problem that we get trapped by, and we do our best, and we have our parameters a little bit wider than some of those guys, but they can't be infinitely wide or you guys aren't going to buy it.
That's right. No, I agree.
And that's the thing that the big producers do really well. They, if you go buy a glass of Jack in New York City, and then you go to Paris and have a glass of Jack, it's going to be exactly the same thing.
But the Coca-Cola tastes good.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about a couple things. We have Adam and Nora here. I want to talk about blending and so American malt blends and the idea of independent bottling. This has come up a couple times in our groups. Are those a thing? Should they be a thing?
Can we let her ask her question?
Sorry.
Right before we do that.
A little question about Can you not just have like, you have all your standardized and that, the other thing, and then just one little specialty that's a craft bottle that changes, and so that it's a kind of a separate thing that you're offering for those of us who want some more creativity in our whiskey?
We do that with our single barrel sales. Some certain accounts.
We have it upstairs.
Like Julio's.
Actually, here's Chris. Chris is his father.
Yeah, and so the account brings their staff, or either bartenders or their executive staff, up to the distillery. We lay out 6 barrels that they've already had samples of, and they taste all 6 barrels, and then they all, as a group, decide which one to buy, and they sign a barrel, and we bottle that barrel for them. And that's about the only way, but it's very labor intensive, and it's very costly, and it means stopping the whole line and cleaning it and starting with 1 barrel. So it's a little difficult to do, but it is done, and we're not the only ones doing it. I mean, almost every large distillery sells single barrels, and MGP.
You have, I mean, all these guys up here all do specialty bottles. They all do specialty products. So they're internally doing that type of thing. They go, hey, you know what would be cool if we did this? Let's try it. If it works out, they go, hey, let's sell it. If it doesn't work out, Jared goes, all right, well, that didn't work.
There you go, hey, let's sell it. If it doesn't work out, you put a special label on it, you only sell it in your tasting room. It's gone.
Just sell that to that big box store that will
charge more. I mean, the amount of BTAC, Buffalo Trace and Tea Collection, that goes out to the world every year, that totals more than all of our production combined on the stage. So if that doesn't give you, oh my God, if that doesn't give you some scale, I mean, what everyone else calls small batch, like, yeah, by definition, that's what's happening with us. So there is variation.
You make a really good point in the sense that we're all relatively speaking smaller producers here. So even our core expressions, the thing that we want you to associate with our house style, by a large distillery standard, would be like a one-off distillery only release.
So you guys want to talk about the potential for American Single Malt Whiskey to spin off things like independent bottling ideas, blended programs amongst different distilleries?
I mean, I come from an independent bottler background. My first job in the industry was working for Gordon & MacPhail. I'm a huge advocate for the concept of independent bottling in American Single Malt, because quite frankly, there is an opportunity for bottlers to showcase a singular slice of something that frankly we don't have the capacity to do. I mean, I'm cognizant of the fact, I know what my job is at West, and I would imagine it's quite similar for everyone up here. We're trying to develop an aficionado, a connoisseur of the Westland brand, of the Balcones brand, of the Virginia Distilling brand, of the Hudson Distillery brand. Doing that is not a simple thing to do. There is more noise in the marketplace now than there has literally ever been before. And noise in the sense of good whiskey and unfortunately bad whiskey. You don't get one without the other. The minute there's more of something coming to the marketplace, you're guaranteed to unfortunately get a little bit of both.
I'm gonna give you a scenario on that I'm gonna argue slightly with it. There is less bad whiskey out there than everybody here thinks. There is actually more whiskey not ready to be sold at market than there is bad whiskey. Hence, I do think that there is a possibility that it's going to blossom literally on its own, independent bottlers, because you're going to have people that tried to go to market that failed because their whiskey was going out too soon, wasn't ready to go. You're going to see people, you'll see a consolidation. If there's a boom, there's a collapse. It's exactly what happens. But there's this whiskey sitting out there in rick houses, waiting for somebody to find it. Oh, by the way, at probably the right time it should have been bottled in the first place. So I think an independent bottler, or people out there that are looking at stuff and buying stuff up, I think that's going to be the natural progression of what's going to happen out there, rather than guys going to you and saying, hey, I want to buy some of your stuff in a barrel. Do you got any stuff that didn't fit into the Westland or the Balcones mainframe, and I want to buy it from you? Or would you fill this barrel with just new make? You're not making enough. You just said yourself, we don't make enough stuff to even you know, it's a pittance, but there's other stuff out there that's gonna go out, that's gonna be available for somebody else to buy. Now, as an independent bottler, or however you wanna structure it, I might only have to wait 1 year for it to be ready. Well, that's a lot less financial investment than I do making a distillery. And, you know, that type of thing, I think, coming down the pike is where I think you'll see more people sort of jump to bring to market.
Yeah, there's also the possibility of blends between all of us, or among all of us. Grants has done that recently with bourbon. They bought batches of bourbon from 5 different distilleries and put out a fistful of bourbon. And it's
breaking that trend.
And it's doing very well. But the point is that they went out and selected from 5 different small distilleries the products that they use. And it's something that we among us will be able to do. I mean, the majority of the scotch in the world is blended. And it comes from medium-sized distilleries all over Scotland. And so, you know, it's bound to happen here too.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who works in the blending side, the idea of getting to work with someone else's liquid is always fascinating. Like, I would love, if they let me come in and just, I don't know what I would do, like put 300 year barrels out instead of my stuff. It'd be a blast. So and the tradition side of that in the UK, like, of course, what a beautiful contribution to
Well, that's the other part.
the whiskey
You guys
world, right?
saying, like, switching barrels and saying, hey,
which is
let's do something cool.
Lou, I'd be curious of your take on this.
Which is,
I would like to see it happen more.
which, you know, part of why we left it in America and not at your distillery or the DSP that is on the brand is because it is happening. I don't know if they want to talk about it or not, but people in the room are doing it, and we didn't want to limit the possibility of them pulling that off.
I'd actually like to hear more from.
Yeah, let's hear it. You guys want to talk about?
If you can.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Adam.
Adam, remember that doesn't project your voice.
It's just for Mark.
Speak up, Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam. I used to be a whiskey advocate with Norm, who used to work at Astor Wines in New York. We're launching Lost Lantern, which is an American independent bottler for craft whiskey. For exactly some of the reasons that we're talking about. But there's a lot of really good stuff out there, and sometimes it's hard to just look at the shelf and know which ones are ready right now, and which ones are still developing. And our first release is actually a blend that I worked with Jared and Virginia Distillery Company on, and a few other distilleries. It is a blended malt from 6 distilleries around the country that we created collaboratively. Everyone tasted barrels across the course of a single day, and we picked the ones we wanted and put together a 12-barrel blend that we're hoping to launch next year. But we really think that there's tons of opportunity here. Just like in Scotch, Islay whiskeys are wonderful on their own, and that smoky flavor is great, but it also adds really unique notes to blends, and seeing how these flavors come together in unique new ways, we think is a new frontier for American Single Malt.
And American whiskey in general.
Yeah.
Playing with flavors across many different profiles, we think there's a lot of potential, and there is still a lot of potential with finding wonderful barrels that people wouldn't have necessarily found otherwise, and creating tasting experiences for everyone. So there's a lot of potential. We think other people will enter the space, and we know other people are entering the space, and we hope that it creates a really interesting conversation across the entire industry.
So you're doing blends and singles?
Yes.
Okay.
Blends and single barrels.
Yeah.
I can tell you from just the Wesson perspective, from going through our blending lab and tasting things with our blender and tasting things with Matt, there are a ton of super interesting single casks that get vatted into things just because maybe that cask had a unique flavor that came through, or maybe there was something about that distillate run that was just a little different. It crushes me to a certain degree that stuff can't all get released on its own.
Yeah.
But quite frankly, from a commercial perspective, it's almost impossible to do so. I mean, I can't overstate the amount of back-end work that happens to get a bottle of whiskey to your table. I literally cannot overstate it. It is why I have a job to a certain degree, because it is immense. It is absolutely immense, and I'm sure that you guys would agree to this. Believe me, nothing would make a majority of us happier than to say, we are going to make 6,000 different SKUs per year. We are going to flood the whiskey. We're going to flood this amazing product out there. and we're just gonna put all of the information on the back label and let the consumers decide.
Well, I don't want labels in bottles. I just want barrels. I would actually like to have just barrels in the store and we come fill them up.
Bring your own jug.
And bring your own jug.
So that is super common in France for what it's worth, not the actual barrel, but
switch on too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be posting a thing up there. I actually grew up part of my life above a supermarket. We were grocers. And if you look at all the common names that you see out there that did all the blending, guess what they were? They were people buying barrels, putting them in their store, and then they started blending them up, and they started selling Justin and Brooks, even Johnny Walker, Doers, and all this stuff. That's the way they started. So I don't even want to have that. I just want to buy barrels and put a brick wall right there, and we just fill them up from the barrels, and you guys take what you want. And you can take a half of one of that and half of one of that, and it all gets added together.
It's easy selling whiskey by the pound at the.
Yeah, pretty much.
So the counterpoint to that, Ryan, just to put very clearly, there's also a quality control thing that we're all mindful of. I have a ton of faith in the fact that you would treat the product appropriately and that you would ensure that the distillate that was coming out of the cask, the whiskey that was coming out of that cask, going into a consumer's home would genuinely reflect the intention of the distillery. I can't say that I agree that that would happen in every place that we
No, because I wouldn't use your name. I would just,
That's what killed Irish whiskey. Was
Yep, that's exactly it.
To stop that, we do the same thing, because in other words, to put that blockage on that, that's why there's Justin Brook. That's why it's not all the different distilleries that made it up.
Yeah.
It went out as a blend, but it's the same thing with you guys doing whatever you do. If you're good or bad, they'll decide. If you do crappy stuff with your stuff and it's terrible, the wallet goes somewhere else.
Yep.
So
This proposal came up at our distillery because of our license.
Right.
We can actually take the distillate and put it, for instance, in big fancy glass containers with spigots and have people fill their own bottle right in our, because it's not out of bond yet, it's still in our tasting room. And when I proposed it, I thought it was a great idea, but then somebody said, well, what if somebody makes something that really tastes like shit?
Bingo.
And then it's gonna go out with our label on it.
Yep.
And somebody's gonna think that's our product.
Yeah, but it's the same thing when you go to a bar and you get something, you buy something and it's sitting in a Sam Adams glass and it was actually Treehouse. I mean, whatever. It's the same thing. You're gonna like, wow, that was crappy, but I was drinking Treehouse.
Except that in this case, somebody who has absolutely no experience or knowledge about blending whiskeys is blending whiskeys.
Right.
And it's a great
Hard thing to do. Question here.
It's not so much a question as a statement to add one more component to that. Us as consumers, and I know there's a bunch of us in this room who do this, especially a lot of nerds and people who are here for this kind of thing. Yeah, I do a lot of home blending. There's lots of profiles out there that I've created that you can't buy in bottles. There's all sorts of things that you can do. And I think that's just a whole other component or facet to this part of it that I don't think necessarily gets pulled into the conversation enough. It's kind of like cooking, right? Like there's a lot of us that do it at home, with chefs being in the kitchen, and I know that's how you guys, a lot of blenders come up with things in the end that they put in a bottle. But at the same time, too, if we're buying, a single barrel from over here, a single barrel from over there, and just going in the bottle, I'm then bringing those bottles home and then doing a whole other thing with it, so.
But to your point about wanting to have the barrels here and fill people's bottles out of the barrels, that presents the added technical and legal problem of making sure that everything that comes out, goes into glass, has its exact proof on it.
No, listen, there's a whole bunch of things in front of that. But in Europe, how many people here have ever been to Scotland and filled a bottle at the distillery? All right, so tell me what the difference is.
Yeah.
The difference is Scotch law and US law.
Well, I get that. I get that it's the same thing as talking about what qualifies as getting rid of gluten and what doesn't. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that happen there. You can do blending classes, there's a whole litany of other things that get people involved. We do stuff like this because what is it? It's an experience. This is something you're not getting at
ABC or whatever stores, you're not getting something like that. We want to offer our consumer a different way of doing things and a different way of thinking things. I mean, we can actually fill up jars of each one of those barrels, and they could play with 100 centiliter graduate cylinder and make a blend before they actually poured it off. So there's ways around different things too, and there's a lot of things that are in front of it, and there's a lot of unscrupulous people that are out there, Chris, that would, that you would have to watch, because you don't want to do it.
Were you asking me? It seemed personal. I just want to point out. So I will point out. I'll make this a 1 second point. What you're speaking about exists in France. The way that France has avoided it is that they all go into glass, so they're inert. They're not going to change. The other thing is they do not say the name of the distillery. In my experience, and Ralph, maybe it's different in Switzerland, but I would say in France, it'll say, Highland Single Malt Distillery B. And then you can do as you please with it, because then, frankly, it absolves us of a lot of the issues of someone just having a bad hand at blending.
That's right. And the other part of that, the sort of the whole scenario that we have, even just from the get-go here, is we cannot change containers. Period. So even if I wanted to take glass containers and fill them, I still can't even do that part of it. So there's a whole bunch of litanies. I can't do flavor and take a 750 and divide it into 25 different vials and send it out to people that God knows what I actually put in that vial, what it is. I can't do that. That's coming from, and it's coming from Slovakia. I mean, I can't do that. So,
Again, we come back to the challenges of the regulatory landscape here or anywhere, really. I mean, I just wanted to wrap up. We got a few minutes. We're happy to hang out, take questions. But again, the initial agenda of the commission was to progress the ratification of our standard of identity. But there are other things that we're doing now. Today's a perfect example. And Ryan's store here is an example of what we want. He has an American Single Malt Whiskey shelf. It's a dedicated shelf where you can find all of our products. I want you guys to talk about why that's important.
Yeah, it's so seriously, how did you not hear that?
He was talking to me, I didn't hear what you said.
You're blaming me for something that's absolutely not the case. So I will say, everyone else here, either ownership or commercial, or involved more in the production side of the whiskey, from a purely commercial perspective, enormously important for us to cut out our space of real estate. If you put us in the American whiskey section, there's not enough specificity right now that people are going to know that these are single malts. And think about it, and I'll use Mark as an example. Mark walks in, let's say Mark absolutely loves Lafroy, right? We want to be in that section because he likes peated single malt whiskey. Well, the minute that we're in the American whiskey section, and we produce a peated that we're really proud of, hell, we're tasting Jared's Balcones single cask peated. It's fantastic. Okay, well, if all of a sudden that's in the whiskey section for American whiskeys, do you all of a sudden walk over to the American whiskey section looking for peated single malts?
I would.
I think we can all say, with a certain level of certainty, you're not going to do that. The person that walks the American whiskey shelf is, at this moment, a bourbon and rye consumer. The person that walks the Scottish single malt shelf is a single malt consumer. I'll be the first to admit, I don't think, or not to admit, I'll be the first to say, our whiskey doesn't taste like bourbon, it doesn't taste like rye. Shockingly, it's not made from corn and it's not made from rye. I want to be with whiskeys made with the same ingredients. Where is single malt? Sell me against single malts. I want to be next to the Japanese producers, next to the French producers, next to the Australians, the New Zealanders. I want to be next to the Indian whiskeys, and I want to be next to the Scots, because I sell single malt. Full stop.
You can go upstairs.
So you said it was the second answer. Oh no, that was the previous one. Sorry. Never mind.
Well, I've been in restaurants and bars and liquor stores where there's, they've got world whiskey, they got world single malts, and you get there and it's Cadillac. They got one brand. And then I go and I look and they've got 12 American single malts mixed in with the American whiskey. It's like you got a whole category on your menu for one brand, and 12 didn't warrant. And upstairs is a great example. Ryan's it's beautiful. It's a great setup. There's all this American single malt right there, and it's right next to Scotch and Irish and Japanese and Taiwanese and Indian, and that's where it belongs. If we're talking about flavor, this is where it makes the most sense.
Having the shelf space is really just kind of the next progression from getting the the TTB definition. And the reason we're doing the TTB definition is because it's what consumers are expecting, and we want consumers to think of single malts and they're similar in the way they're composed. And so, if we're committing, whether it's just through the commission or whether it's through statute, if these are the definitions of what we're giving the consumer, then naturally we should stand beside each other, not just on the panel but on the shelf. And to me, it always just comes down to the consumer, because not every consumer is as educated as folks in this room, but you have to not go to the lowest common denominator, but at least something where you're squaring up of here's what we have in the bottle. It's fitting the same definition that Jared is, that Chris and Steve is, that Ralph is, and that's my product as well.
Well, actually, to both of your points, and it's sort of like now it actually now jumps into another layer. So it's really not about the production. So for example, somebody wants a smoky whiskey, right? Why should you be excluded from people who are sick? But isn't that actually, from a retail level or from an educational level, their job is to direct, so for example, I've seen wine stores do this as well. So, right, which is like, so this is like big, smoky, and malty, right? And here are all of the variations. And here's, anything that, this is sweet and spicy and whatever that may be. And then that actually becomes less a distinction of whether that's a single malt or anything else, but it fits that flavor profile. I know somebody in New York that's actually it's a brilliant merchandising that they do. I've never seen it anywhere else, where they actually do that. They'll fit it around a flavor theme, or they'll fit it around even an idea, like, this is what you should be drinking for the upcoming holiday weekend, or something like that, right? So then it goes beyond exactly what your designation is, and now it's sort of like, how do you go to market, And then, so American Single Malt and English, Scottish Single Malt, Irish Single Malt almost become at that point arbitrary designations.
It's an interesting point. So the concept you're talking about, my assumption is that's what, there's a guy by the name of Josh Wesson who started Bestsellers, where it was all the wines were categorized by profile and had nothing to do with the grape varietal. I find that really interesting. I think
it's great when you have 1,000 SKUs. It's a little bit more difficult when you start popping into 3,000 and 4,000.
Right.
And by the way, that's a re-education of the entire consumer population. The way you buy.
I think
the way you guys buy. So listen, I am not going to force people to go to a different section because I, in my infinite wisdom, thinks that that's the way you're supposed to buy. A good example of that was it was at one point was actually Southern Comfort. What's Southern Comfort? Everybody know?
Yeah, booze.
No.
It's booze.
It's booze. Very good. Very good. Get Lou a star, please. At one point, it was flavored whiskey. At another point, it was Nutri-Grain spirit with a concentrate put into it and flavoring of peach. Right? Now it's back to flavored whiskey. So I have to put where people think it should be.
Yeah.
So, it was always right by where whiskey was, even though it never was whiskey. And now it's back where it's supposed to be in whiskey because it's flavored whiskey again. So, I couldn't take it out and put it in a cordial and then moved it back because people are looking for it where they're looking for it. I'll sell less of it if I don't put it where you want to find it. So if I put all the scotches together and put them, do I really want to put? Do I put all Lefroy together, or do I start delineating and splitting it up and putting this one's not as smoky as this one, so right now Bowmore should go next, and then 3 ones over that the next Lefroy will go. And stuff like that. It can be very easily done. It's actually not that difficult, but you'll go nuts.
And then absolutely,
you'll go forget this, and you'll walk out the door, and I've lost you.
And
So there is a balance of what you have to have.
in an absolute perfect world, what I'd really like to see, and I think we'll get to this point sooner or later as there's more and more great malt whiskey from around the world, you really won't have a Scotch section, you'll have a malt whiskey section, and then frankly, things will get filtered inappropriately.
And that's not what we're doing now.
I would argue you're certainly the closest to that from frankly a lot of the producers or the people in the US doing it. I think right now we need that level of specificity to drive eyes to it. The fact that we've got a subcategory built here right on the American whiskey, or excuse me, right on the Scotch whiskey line is great. People see it, it's clear to associate that these are made from malted barley because look what they're right next to. In time, as there's a greater understanding for what malt whiskey means from around the world, American Single Malt as well, then yeah, I would love to see us sort of mixed in and say, oh, the profile of this is similar to the profile of that, but the overarching category of this thing is malt whiskey.
What a lot of people forget is if you're gonna innovate, right? You're gonna innovate, you have to educate. And the educational portion takes more time than your innovation does. So I love innovation, but I have to go along with how the education of that is in your acceptance of what it is.
This is what I've been waiting, as it's been working its way down here, and I'm just gonna jump in.
Yeah, please do.
A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, and we're talking about it here. Now, I mean, I've been writing about whiskey for over 20 years now, and the level of education about whiskey among people who buy and drink whiskey has skyrocketed. It's huge now, and you know what? It's still a tiny little bubble. Okay, because we're still that tiny little bubble. It's a much bigger bubble than it was, but it's still just a gnat fart. And this is something. That's all. That's all it is. We have got.
Is that what a G?
Yeah. It's kind of incumbent on all of us to continue that process. Share. I mean, this is something I learned when I first got involved in drink back in the early 80s I started craft beer really early. I had my first out of the mainstream thing in 1981, and one of the things I learned pretty quickly was when you find new shit, you tell new people. You know, you share the knowledge. When you learn something and you hear somebody saying the wrong thing, don't just nicely say, well, you know, that actually turns out not to be the case.
You actually have to use that high voice.
Absolutely not. You want to share this as much as possible because, again, we're still that tiny bubble. When you expand the bubble, it becomes much better for you. Because everybody else is learning this stuff and more stuff becomes available, and eventually the distilleries and the age catches up and we're not,
Demand meets it.
Yeah.
If you're demanding stuff, they'll make it, trust me. They'll make it.
Education was most of what we did in the beginning. And in fact,
it's all of what we do.
Yeah, the whole idea that you can make whiskey and not be Jim Beams.
Whiskey Wednesdays, you know, tastings. This is where it all started. Even our whole system, Julio's really has a system of try before you buy. We present as many opportunities for you guys to try things before you actually buy them. That in alone knocks out half the stuff because you can't describe to me what you like. I can't tell you what you like, nor would I start to do that. And so if I can get you in front and get, we like to say, like lips to liquid, you already know the mystery has been taken out of the entire equation. And I'll tell you what, right now, one of the few stores that I see that if somebody's wandering the aisle, I have more customers telling people what they should be buying than my staff does. Because you guys are now educated.
Yeah.
We've brought you along. People go, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? I said, it's time consuming. You have to do it in a way that makes everybody feel included into it. It brings it along and everybody gets to go along for the ride. The result of that is I can look in this room and I know almost all of you, and I know at one point in time I've seen you in an aisle helping a customer. Because you want to share what you've just learned. And it's great. And that's the same thing. These guys can't, all these guys up here cannot be here every week, once a quarter, they can't be here. They
As much
have
as Chris
business.
wants to be.
Chris wants to be. I have a cot in the back for Chris. But they want to be here. So in other words, to make their brands work, to make everything work, they need ambassadors. They need people who have drunk the Kool-Aid. And you guys are that. If you like the product, you like what they're doing, you understand their transparency, you understand the love and care that are being made into the product, you become their ambassador. They don't need to be here as much because you're helping them out.
You can tell, I mean, Lou's right, you can tell the level of education has gone up just by the nature of the questions today.
That's right.
I mean, come on guys, you guys are asking real questions. It wasn't like that 10, 15 years ago. There were people asking where are the potatoes kept, you know, there's a much higher level of education across.
Do you actually use your hands when you hand make things?
I mean, you gotta press the buttons.
You gotta press the buttons. I want to make
Just gonna stick.
Wait a minute, there's a lot of people in this room. Will somebody make me a meme of, this is what I want. I want a meme of what is handmade. And I want to put what the consumer thinks handmade is, and that's somebody with holding grain in their hands over a Bunsen burner. And what
You don't want to make that yourself?
no, I've done it, it really hurts. And what the industry think handmade's in it, it's like a person pushing a red button. And that's really, it's somewhere in between that, by the way. But the definition is getting past marketing, getting all this stuff.
Oh, that was the big problem with the argument over the last few years about the word craft.
Craft.
In the whiskey business. And in the beginning, at the American Craft Spirits Association, when we were trying to figure out what to call the association and where the limit we can cut off was, where we're no longer a craft distiller. And I made the point that, you know, there's a guy in the Glenfiddich factory, he's been there 50 years. Are you going to try to tell him he's not a craftsman because they make too much?
Right. No, that's true.
And so it's not that at all. And so educating, but to go back to a moment to the education point, in the beginning, one of our biggest jobs was actually educating the bartenders and the buyers and the managers and the retailers.
We're still trying to educate the salesmen.
And it got to the point where I used to carry a copy of the Standards of Identity in my pocket when I was selling. So that when somebody said, well, you can't make, this isn't bourbon, you know, because it's made in New York. Oh, well, let's look at the rules. Take out the definitions, the federal definitions.
We should all carry a band with us. That would be
When there's questions, or do we need
Do you guys have questions? We can go a little bit longer, but I don't know how everybody's sort of feeling about it.
I have one question.
Sure, Lou.
Would everyone please take one of these? That's not a question. It was a hell of a long way up from Philadelphia, and I'd like to make it worthwhile.
Yes. Please help the poor man out. Please.
over here. Sorry, go ahead.
Before we go, and I think everybody sort of wants to break off. This has been, for me, this has been fantastic. Did you guys like this sort of format? Yeah. We can have ideas of like what you guys would like to see and see if we can put some of this stuff together. I mean, it's very difficult bringing all of these people in one room to do something like this.
They want a caramel coloring tutorial.
I'd be more than willing to try to work some of that stuff out. But this is, you know, this is a sort of a long goal of what we do here at Julio's that sets us apart from everybody else. Is making sure, because the more you know, the better customers of ours you will be. Because you know, we're not telling you, this was the latest one, the whiskey was cured differently, and that's why it tastes like heat and smoke and fire, and the other one, you know, doesn't. And because there's a lot of misinformation out there, we're trying to set the record straight. So, and we need help doing that. So this is the whole types of things that we do. We really appreciate everybody coming out today and doing this. And is there anything else I need to say for you guys? Thank you.